and is directing the AMMACHI Labs, where I do work, and the Center for Women Empowerment and Gender Equality. So, Bhavani, I assume you're on. If you are, why don't you say a few words and then we can begin.
Thanks, Sid. I am on, and I turn my video on too. I have a lot of ambient sound over here. There's singing going on, so it may be a little, I don't know if you can hear me clearly over and above the singing, but I'm so happy to meet you, Howard. Sid has been talking about you for years now. So I have heard so much about you, and it's and I know if you know Sid, then you know that he would have talked about you in like the most glorious terms. And it's been always a pleasure, and I'm so excited that I finally get to hear from you and to see you. Super excited about it. I lived in Boston for a very brief while, and so when Sid talks about you and your time together in Boston, I can almost picture it in my head. So yeah, really excited. And he told you a little bit about the work that we do. And like he said, we are a very eclectic group, not just robotics, people from data sciences, from machine learning, from artificial intelligence, but also very hardcore social sciences, but also from education. Yes, so it's like really a very motley group of people. But like he said, we work very closely with rural communities, and are at the heart of what we do is skill development, because we have to build, we believe very strongly in building capacity. And I think one of the things that fascinated with me most about what Sid had told me about you and what I read was the multiple intelligences, because we can see that at play when we're working in the villages so clearly in front of us. So really excited to be hearing from you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Howard, so you know what, let me just make a brief introduction. In moments like this, with people like you, people generally say, Howard needs no introduction, right? But I'll introduce you anyway. So let me tell you as an introduction, something which you know and the people who are listening in don't know. But, and somebody once had mentioned that in a talk they gave to the group, and that is that Antonio Batro often says, science is friendship. And science is friendship. And one of the most wonderful parts of science in the academic world is the friendships that are formed and forged. So you and I go back over 50 years now, probably. And we had all of our scientific discussions and gossip and all the usual things that we do. But we've also had a close friendship, and I'm grateful for that. Now, you know that, and I'm not sure if I've even told you that, but now you're here with many people listening in, so there are witnesses as well. I'd like to thank you for coming. I know that you are super busy, and there are special reasons now why talking today was difficult, or is difficult, but you did it. And I'm really very, very pleased that we could meet again, you and I, in this kind of a forum with the most wonderful people at AMMACHI Labs and the Center for Women Empowerment and Gender Equality. An exceptional group of people, really. So my friends, let me tell you a tiny bit about Howard. Howard does not fit the usual paradigm for academics. Academics usually are in a field, usually in a subset within the field, and sometimes even a subdomain within the domain within the field. And Howard's curious mind, synthesizing mind, spreads across many areas: psychology, education, cognitive sciences, writ large, social sciences, humanities, the arts. I don't know of anybody who has mastered so many fields and harnessed them to create or to support the ideas that he has. Among the things that Howard looked at, a few are when he was very young. Now he's only young, but when he was very young, he was interested in how language is represented in the brain, and did that through brain damage, seeing what parts failed in language and connecting that with areas of damage. Wrote about the history of the cognitive sciences. So he has the historian streak in him, which is also part of developmental psychology. Wrote the incredible book, Mind's New Science. He changed the world of intelligence, of our understandings of intelligence, in what he believes is, in a book he recently wrote, maybe what people most connect him with, which is the idea of multiple intelligences, where we should not be restricted to basically language and math tests that test intelligence, but far beyond, including musical intelligence. For those who don't know, Howard is a very, very accomplished pianist. Also teaches piano. I don't know if you still do, but he used
Only
to
to
teach
myself.
only to yourself. Okay. And then he got interested in genius, which is one aspect of intelligence. And from there, he noticed some characteristic of geniuses, and he was wondering about whether or not there were geniuses in domains unlike math, music, inter and interpersonal intelligences, but corporations, how people work together and work in corporations, and how they create good work in places which that is not necessarily what is the norm. Well, I could go on, and it sounds like I've gone on and on. There is an end to it, but it's a very long list. And the bottom line is that Howard has influenced major domains. As I said, social sciences, humanities, in ways that a few people have done. And he's received awards exactly for that. He's interstitial. He did not do it by looking at sub domains. So, Howard, great that you're here, really. So we wanted to have a conversation rather than you giving a talk. And so I have a question for you, and obviously feel free if you don't want to answer it. And then you should tell me what you want me to ask you, and I'll be happy to ask you that. So you've been around a long time, and you've seen changes taking place in fields that you helped fashion. And I was wondering if you could put on your future lens and think about where is it you think that work is going in the many fields that you've touched.
Well, that's a very broad question.
Yeah.
I will try to walk down the path with you. Let me first say to everybody that Sid is indeed a friend of many, many years and of many, many experiences and topics. So when he talks about me as being polymathic, I think any of you who've spent time with him in person or virtually know that he also has wide curiosity and also has affected people both by his work and by his personality. I do, from a distance, monitor what's happening in the world of scholarship, though when you reach Sid and my age, you're more likely to know about the individuals who are your peers rather than the individuals who are one or two generations younger. So that's simply a fact. Talking with peers like Sid and a man named Bill Damon, who Sid knows well, we deplore the hyper-specialization which is taking place in much of the academy. I know the United States the best, and if you want to get a permanent position, what we call tenure, the route is to study one very narrow issue in great depth, so you know more than anybody else about it, and to publish a series of articles in high prestige journals. And if you try to be broader and you try to write books rather than articles, this works very much against you. So we were, like old people, deploring this trend. And Bill Damon pointed out two facets which were reassuring. Number one, there's always a pendulum. And the pendulum swings from hyper-specialization to hyper-generalization and back and forth. So when you have a period where people know more and more about less and less, there's going to be reaction where people are rewarded for having a broader prospect. Second, and very, very important, the best work doesn't necessarily take place in university departments. It can take place in NGOs, non-government organizations. It can take place in professional schools, business schools, education schools, divinity schools. It can even take place by solitary scholars. And so it's a mistake to focus on who's getting tenure at Stanford University in developmental psychology and to ignore what's happening in a much broader prospect. Earlier
By
this
the way, Howard,
Yeah.
it's Gwen Hyo.
I'm sorry?
It's Gwen Hyo, a South African woman who's getting tenure at Stanford. Sorry.
All right. Earlier this week, I did a broadcast like this in England. And in London now, there's a new school that's opening up next year called the London Interdisciplinary College. London, so it's in England. Disciplinary, so it's interdisciplinary, so it's across disciplines. And college, which basically has the American connotation of college. It's not a secondary school, it's not a university, it's a college, but it's focused on combining disciplines to solve real life problems, whether they are climate change or poverty or ecology or the preservation of truth, something I'm very interested in. And you wouldn't have needed to have a school like this when I went to college 60 years ago in the United States, because there were many places doing interdisciplinary work. That was my own training. And there were many people who thought they were solving problems. So the problems they were solving, we could discuss for a long time whether they were the right problems. But the fact that in Britain, which is every bit as insular in a literal as well as a poetic sense in its universities, is opening up an interdisciplinary college, that's a very important message. Let me simply say one more word in context. Sid did invite me to give a talk, and at my age, and I'm going to tell you something about my age, I'm bored with hearing myself talk. I've heard myself talk enough, and everything I've said is available on YouTube. You don't have to get me. So I said I like to have a conversation, but I will tell you two factoids, which, if you remember nothing else from this talk, from this conversation, you may remember, and that is that I shared two items with President Biden, Joseph Biden. Number one, we're the same age. Number two, we were both born and raised in a small city in Pennsylvania called Scranton. So Biden and I, we don't know each other. We're both Scrantonians in our late 70s. And one wonderful thing about having grown up in the United States in the 50s, and this is very different than having grown up in most places in most of history, so I insist it's very unusual, is both Biden, whom I didn't know, and my friends, who of course I didn't know, we all thought we could do everything. We didn't think that we would have difficulty getting a job. We didn't think we would have difficulty making a living. We didn't think we would have difficulty, in a house and so on. And that was a very special time. It wasn't special if you were not a white male. I was Jewish, as is Sid, and I got away with it in the 1950s because being Jewish wasn't a very high category in people's consciousness. But in the 1920s, I wouldn't have gotten into a college. I wouldn't have gotten into medical school. So there's a lot about luck. And again, Biden and I don't share properties, but we did share the property of possibility. And to me, it's very tragic that that's not true for so much of the world. And that's one of the reasons I'm very interested in good work, which we'll probably talk about presently.
Howard, maybe you could talk a little bit about the work you were doing on the humanities, large-scale project. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about that.
Okay, well, I think I know what you mean. It's my college study, but it's not particularly about the humanities. We called it the study of liberal arts, but then we discovered that even though many colleges and universities in the United States call themselves liberal arts, most people didn't know what that meant. So we now just call it non-vocational higher education. And again, for those of you who are in India, this is important because in India, almost all post-secondary education is vocational. It's mostly engineering, but it could be medicine or law or education. There are other fields besides engineering. The United States and England and places influenced by England or by the UK have a notion of non-vocational education after college. And after secondary school, and we call that liberal arts. And the notion of liberal arts is that before you become a doctor or lawyer or accountant or engineer, you should study across various fields. So in most United States colleges, the ones you would have heard of, when you go there, you might focus on history or on biology or on literature, but you're expected to take courses in writing. You're expected to take courses in humanities like art or music or literature. You're expected to take courses in social science like economics or political science or sociology, and you're expected to take science or maybe physics for poetry, which is kind of people who aren't very good in science take that course. And my colleagues and I at Harvard were interested in what was going on in college education in the second decade of the century, so roughly 2010 to 2020. Now, academics like to talk, we like to write, and there are lots of books about college, but we decided that before we wrote a book, we would interview people. So over 6 years, from 2012 to 2018, we interviewed 2,000 people on 10 different campuses. And each campus, we spoke to 50 beginning students, what we call freshmen, 50 completing students, what we call seniors, and then a smaller number of trustees, they're the ones that set policy, senior administrators, they manage the school, parents of students, alumni, people who'd gone to the school before, and job recruiters, people who go to schools and colleges and hire people, because we really wanted to understand what it is like to attend post-secondary education in the United States in that period. And just this week, my co-author, my senior author, Wendy Fishman, and I are doing the final manuscript for a book which is tentatively entitled The Real World of College. The Real World of College. And we like that name because we didn't just write about what we thought, we wrote about what we learned from speaking to 2,000 people. I spoke to a few hundred myself. Wendy spoke to more. I read every single transcript. We did big data analysis of the words that were used. And we have a very full understanding of what college is like in the United States today. And to be honest with you, Wendy and I do not yet have the elevator speech. So if Sid said to me, tell you in 50 words or less what we concluded, we'd have to say, read the book. But not to be totally mysterious. First of all, two depressing things we learned. And this was between 2012 and 2018. So it wasn't about COVID. It was to some extent about Trump. Is the biggest problem on every American campus is mental health. And associated to that, a feeling of alienation, a feeling that you don't belong. You don't belong to your cohort, your fellow students. You don't belong to the academic curriculum. And you don't feel like you belong to the institution. So you don't feel like you belong to Duke University, which is one that we studied, or Queens College, which is another one studied. It was depressing to learn about these mental health problems and depressing to learn about the alienation problems, but very important because you can't get onto the major goal of higher education, which is higher education, if you have people that are mentally distraught, stressed, anxious, and alienated. And we don't have any magic formula for making everybody healthy and feeling like they belong. But in the absence of that, it's very difficult to achieve higher education. And there are two other problems. One is that from our point of view, most students are entirely transactional. That is, they only ask, what can college give for me? And not what can I learn or how can I contribute, which gets us to good work issues. And second of all, this has nothing to do with colleges, with students, it has to do with colleges and universities. Colleges and universities suffer what we nicknamed projectitis, which is the disease of having too many projects. So if you've ever gone to an American campus or simply Google any school you've heard of, Yale, Princeton, Duke, Stanford, Berkeley, you'll see thousands of different extracurricular activities, gyms, theaters, clubs. Harvard College, for 1,600 students in a class, has 400 clubs, which means 1 out of every 4 people can become the president of some club. And what that means is that the reason that we have higher education, namely to educate the mind, is getting lost. So maybe that's what the elevator speech is going to be. It's going to be about helping colleges find the way for what they're designed to do, which is to educate the mind.
If you were to have a meeting with the president of Harvard, and he would want to know what it is that you learned and what you think could be done to partially, at least, or to address the issues that you talked about, even though you said that you don't know how to do this.
Okay, well,
he has to do things. What would you advise him?
Sid has a genius for asking questions which would evoke 3-hour answers from me. I've been at Harvard since 1961. I've known all the presidents. the current president, Larry Bacow, helped us to design the study because he was president of Tufts University at that time, and we studied Tufts University. So maybe we should make the question somewhat more general, because this is like asking, what would you say to your grandfather, or what would you say to your grandson? It's a rather personal question. I guess I would say that the pressures of the 21st century, which are positive and negative, and the unexpected pandemic, which may well continue indefinitely, nobody knows, should make every institution and every enterprise, meaning every profession, say what is really essential. What is the one thing that we can do that there aren't other institutions can do, and there aren't other professions that can do. And that one should focus like a laser on that particular thing, which is special, in this case, institutions of higher learning right after secondary school, not professional law schools, but what we call college. And clear the deck, to make a poem, get rid of the dreck, which is a word for the dirt, the schmutz, the stuff that you don't need. And this is going to be the difficult things to swallow. Compete with other colleges and universities to do that better and more demonstrable than any other school in your sector. Don't try to be a vocational training place. Don't even try to be a civics training place. Don't try to be a collection of clubs. And I'll give you, now we'll switch to the president of Harvard for a minute. I'll let you, this is a thought experiment. I don't do pads, but we can do it in our mind. Harvard College has elite, 1,600 elite students each year are admitted. Take a guess, when last year for the graduating students, how many of them went into, what percentage went into teaching, and what percentage went into finance or management consultants? Take a guess about what percentage became teachers, which is what school is about, teaching, and what percentage became management consultants or went to Wall Street. I won't ask Sid to stick his neck out, but I hope each of you are playing that thought experiment. 2% go into teaching. So you can do the math, about 30 people go into teaching. And 45% go into management consultants or to Wall Street. Should Harvard be a college where all we do is train people to go to Wall Street or to work for McKinsey? Neither of which I have particularly good things to say about. Why have a department of Ukrainian history or of classics or the greatest poetry teachers or the greatest music faculty if you're just going to train people for Wall Street? You know what you should do? You should go to secondary school, get the people who score the best on a test, and make them in training at Goldman Sachs. That wouldn't make the president of Harvard very happy, but he knows that statistic because we see it every day. And when people say to me, and I'm basically at a school of education, how can we make American K-12 education better? Because it's terrible for the most part. I say, triple the salaries of teachers, give them a professional track, and leave them alone. Because if you go to the best secondary schools, whether they're private or public, they pay teachers a decent salary and they leave them alone.
Let me ask people in the audience. So Howard's talking about the United States in the 1950s and now. What Howard said about the 1950s, I felt the same thing in Chicago, not in Scranton. you had a sense of no barriers, although you knew there were barriers, but most depended on yourself, on you, how talented you were and how hard you were willing to work. The second being extremely important. So, and then the way that Howard described what's happening these days in colleges and undergraduate studies. Does this resonate with anything in India? Does it sound familiar? I'm not asking a rhetorical question. Anybody want to, as Howard said, stick your neck out?
The concept, I think, in India, if you look at, I don't know about the British influenced the Indian education system quite drastically, and I think in India, what Howard said about us being really not like we're all vocational education, and that kind of a focus has always been quite strong. But I think, and I don't know, but this is not my area, I'm just making a guess. I would think that maybe that the culture of the Indian education and the other kinds of education that used to come traditionally probably rounded off that education a little bit, and that is missing right now. So if we did the same study in India in the same timelines that Howard looked at, I think you'll find the same problem over here also, that it's very siloed and very narrow, and I think the same problems that Howard found in the US can be found in India too right now. And I think that's the reason why we've really tried very hard to be a very different university, in the sense that we're very interdisciplinary and we really work on grassroots problem. And what he said was very natural. This is also very natural to us because we feel this is the only way to actually study. Not to narrow ourselves down this way. I don't know if that makes sense, but yeah, in India it's very siloed, extremely so.
Well, thank you for that. Thinking about India and Israel, 60 years ago, 70 years ago, very much into nation building. And then 30 years ago, very much into neoliberalism. And the neoliberalism, which is a big word for, at the end of the day, what matters is how much money you have and nothing else. And we're going to basically organize our institutions around people who either can make money or trade money. There are a lot of casualties. And you know, the topic that Sid asked me to talk about, which we'll probably get to, is what does it mean to be a good worker and a good citizen? I'll tell you what may be the one finding from our higher education study that you'll remember. With big data, we simply looked at the American students, 1,000 students from 10 different campuses, and saw how many times they used the word I and how many times they used the word we. Simple count. You guess in your own mind. 11 times as many I's as we's. The we's were we, they were tiny. The I's were huge. I bet you if you went to India in 1940, maybe not 1947, but 1952, or you went to Israel in 1958, you would hear a lot more we's about a growing country that was free, basically in both cases, of imperial British rule, though it was very different in Palestine Mandate than it was in colonial India. And now if you looked especially at colleges and universities, we would be very small and I's would be very big. We live in a planet of 7 or 8 billion people. If we're all out for ourselves, it's not going to survive. Even if at the end of the day, there are more billionaires in India and in Israel and the United States than there are people in a small Latin American country.
And yet both the United States has its history, its antecedents, European and British empiricist philosophy. You have Israel, deeply rooted in thousands of years of Jewish philosophy and understanding about the world. And India also, thousands of years. And yet, with all these differences, profound differences, there seems to be a convergence at a more specific level. How can that be? How do you account for that?
Well, I'll give you two different thoughts prompted by your question. When the Iron Curtain fell down in 1989, the Berlin Wall and the consequential decline and fall of communism in a strict sense in Eastern Europe and Russia, it looked like, to use a famous phrase, history had ended. And it was going to be a world of globalization, democracy, and capitalism. And any kinds of constraints on that were disbanded, alleviated, destroyed. I think it was very naive, and we're paying the consequences for it now. But that's where you had what came to be called the Davos or global consensus, that there was one best way to do things. It was sort of Anglo-American with some of Europe thrown in, and maybe a touch of the tigers from Asia, and that was that. The other thing, which I think you all know a great deal about, is the rise of autocracy and authoritarianism all over the world. In Israel, in India, in Israel, certainly in Trump's the United States, Brazil, Philippines, Turkey, Hungary. This is the, Bhavani wrote about collectivism. This is the people who felt that they were the country and are now being left out because of the people who are the winners in the neoliberal world, the 45% of the Harvard graduates. And if I were at Harvard College today, that's where I would be probably going to, would be for McKinsey or Bain or one of those companies, because that's what the signals are in the colleges and universities. There are a lot of casualties, and the casualties are speaking up by becoming conservative, that's a mild word, but to becoming racist, autocratic, authoritarian, those are more accurate descriptions. And I'm certainly under no illusion whatsoever that I can do anything about this, but as a scholar in a country where so far I'm allowed to say what I want, I could at least speak truthfully to you. And the collectivism in India, when it involves a feeling of solidarity with your neighbor, is good, but when it means there's an in-group and an out-group, that's bad. And all of your tensions within the country and on your borders are between in-groups and out-groups, so defined by each group.
So maybe you can talk a little bit about good works. The counterpoint to what it is that you're decrying correctly, accurately. So
Sure.
what is?
Let me give a bit of background, but then I'm going to restrict myself to no more than 5 minutes because I'd like to allow 15 minutes for anything that people want to raise. But 25 years ago, two colleagues who Sid knows well, Bill Damon and Mike Csikszentmihalyi, and I went to a research center in California to work together. And the question we were interested in was whether you could be creative on the one hand, but also be humane and generous and kind on the other, or whether these were independent or even inconsistent with one another. You couldn't both be a kind of a highly creative person, but also care about other things. And we had useful discussions, and we finally designed something that we originally called humane creativity, then we called it good work, and now we just call it the Good Project. And if you want to know more about the Good Project, it's very easy. Just remember the title, thegoodproject.org, and you can find out about it. But let me give you the elevator speech, because here I do have the elevator speech. Good work is work that has three properties, and in English, they all begin with the letter E. Good work is excellent, it's engaging, and it's carried out in an ethical way. So excellence means whether you're a plumber, a doctor, a salesman, a marketer, a professor, a lawyer, you know what you're doing. You're excellent, you have the excellent skills and knowledge. Engage is something you can't make somebody, but you hope that you care about what you're doing. You know, you like going to work, you like being with your colleagues, you believe in the mission of what you're doing. And then ethics, which is what I've focused on for decades now, is when there are difficult situations, you think a lot about what's the right thing to do, and then you try to do it. Nobody succeeds all the time in ethics because ethical issues are difficult, but you're certainly not going to succeed if you show you know what the right thing to do is, you don't consult anybody else, and you don't reflect on it afterwards. So ethics is a kind of dialectic of when you're in a tough spot, really work very hard to try to do the right thing. So good work is people know what they're doing, they're excellent, they care about it, they're engaged, and they try to do it in an ethical way. Full stop. What's a good citizen? A good citizen is parallel. A good citizen knows the laws, knows the rules, knows the Constitution or whatever the governing principles are, cares. You could memorize the US Constitution, but you might not care about it. You might not, and ethics, you try to do the right thing. When people who are very wealthy, as we have in all three of our countries, just vote so there's no taxes, that's not being ethical, that's being selfish. If they say, I have enough or I have more than enough, I'm going to be generous, I'm going to give away, I'm going to try to help, then they're being ethical. I said it's not a good thing to just think you know all the right answers. So we have something which we call the several Ds, usually 5, but sometimes there's 4, sometimes 6. Is when an ethical situation is a dilemma. That's you're not sure what to do. Dilemma, Greek, 2 different options. So when you have a dilemma, you define the dilemma, you discuss it, you debate it, both sides, you make a decision because the dilemma you have to decide, then afterwards you debrief. What went wrong, what went right? If I had to do it again, what would I do? So you have dilemmas, you describe, discuss, debate, decide, and debrief. And if you do that continuously, you're likely to be much more ethical than if you don't. Incidentally, and this does apply to our 3 countries, Israel, India, and the United States, at least for this moment, is the Ds only work in a democratic society where you can actually talk about these things and argue about them. Once you turn into a dictatorship, you can't do this because the right answer is told. And if you don't do it, as we're learning in Russia now, you just end up in jail, or you live in the wrong Chinese province, or you're in former Burma, Myanmar. When you get rid of democracy, you get rid of discussion and debate. So those are the things we've talked about in the Good Project. As I say, there are over 100 articles and many blogs. I will say, because since I'm about to shut up and hear your questions, that I still write books, but mostly I blog. And over the last 5 years, I've probably written 400 or 500 blogs. Most of them are not read by anybody. I'd rather that they would be read, but there may not be. But it's where I put out what it is that I'm thinking about things. And it's for me to have a conversation with myself, a debate with myself. Over to you, Sid.
Okay. Nandita, do you want to take over this part and ask people what questions they have? I can't see here, but my guess is that there might be a chat or two question.
Yeah, hello Sid, and hello Dr. Howard. It's really a pleasure to listen to you and to follow the conversation also between you and Sid. So
Thanks.
actually, it's really nice to meet you. And yeah, here with that, I invite the plenum. Please do chat, post your questions into the chat. I will try to coordinate that and forward that to Dr. Howard. But in the meanwhile, I would like to take the chance and would also reply to a very nice aspect of the Howard you were raising in the very beginning. And you were referring to it by your study, by this large study in which you interviewed so many people. And you said in this higher educational institutions, and especially in colleges, there is this missing piece of education of the mind. And this reminded me a lot of the work actually we are doing here, inspired also through the institutional culture here at Amrita and inspired by the by Srimati Amritanandamayi. She defines, or Amrita defines, education as two wings of a bird. So we have the education for living, which ensures you to be a professional and have at the end of the day a full plate and a roof over your head, and education for life, which helps you to live really a life in dignity, empowered, and learn the art of living. So what is a successful life, how it is defined, and is success just having a good position and a full bank account, or is it to be simply happy? And I'm really very fortunate because I'm coming from Germany. I miss that a lot, this aspect of education, this education for life. And we have the luxury here that we can dedicate really in each of the seminars aspects of education for life, so that we strengthen ethics, that we strengthen also connectedness. And this leads me to the second thing you have mentioned, this feeling of loneliness in the colleges. And interestingly, research also shows, if I'm not mistaken, it is from a researcher from the Max Planck Society. Her name is Koch, if I'm not mistaken. And she could show that actually the subjective feeling of connectedness and not the quantity of friends leads to mental well-being in general. And this aspect is really very much covered in the part of education for life, and if you so want, also in the education of the mind you have mentioned. And it was really very wonderful to see that, and that results also through this large study you have done over the years, and it's really very exciting. So in a way we talk the same language. That's why I'm really very excited to have this conversation. Yeah.
I would just comment that as a parent and grandparent, I like the saying, children never pay any attention to what you say, but they never miss anything that you do. I think the best teachers and mentors and personnel at a college or university or in a preschool, they teach by how they behave, how they act, how they interact, how they relate to other people, and so on, the role models. And even though I study ethics, I think a course in ethics is much less important than seeing what happens when there's a problematic situation that arises in class or on campus or indeed in the real world, and see how people deal with it. So I think we teach by example, by mentoring. Of course, it's helpful to have vocabulary, and as a scholar, I try to give vocabulary. But when my students threw a party for me, I think Sid was there when I was a certain age. I was kind of touched by how many students didn't write about articles about me, but read about how I behaved. And if I misbehaved, they slapped my hand. But I think that's one of the ways that we get things across. But we do have a more narrow definition of higher education. We talk about what it means to attend attend, analyze, debate, reflect, and communicate. And I think higher education has failed if at the end of whatever the higher education unit is, call it school, college, university, students can't better analyze, reflect, debate, discuss, analyze, and communicate. That's what I think we're teaching. And that's what scholars know how to teach, because that's what we do every day. And we call this higher educational capital. And in our book, we have a whole chapter on how to measure and develop higher education capital. And it doesn't depend upon a particular curriculum. You can get higher education capital from a range of different curricula, but it's how you approach the readings and the projects that convey that thinking. Other questions and issues?
Yes, before I coordinate the question answer part, I would like to check the timing. So how much time would we have for this?
Yeah, I have to leave in no more than 10 minutes because I have other things.
No more than 10 minutes. All right.
Okay,
all right.
so I'd like to ask everybody who's asking a question to please try and make it as short as possible.
And I'll get my answers short too.
Yeah, Dr. Bhavani had a comment here. She said, I understand ethics is a debate between what is the right apt right. Why do we have laws that talk about the absolute wrongs without defining the absolute rights? If we have a framework that establishes that should not be done, should we not also have something that establishes what should be done? Maybe we only have ethics. Yeah. Dr. Bhavani, well, please, yeah. I invite you also to participate.
Here, but it's just like we have something very strong about what we shouldn't do, but we don't have anything strong about what we should do. And I understand that you don't think that that's a good idea also, because then it can get really autocratic. But maybe the whole thing should be like the living law. It should be all about a negotiation. If you're going to be so insistent on putting something in stone, or you have a document that outlines what shouldn't be done, you should have a document that outlines what should be done, and you should educate people also about what should be done. Maybe
yeah, I wouldn't agree with that entirely, because when I said you need a democratic society, you can debate about it openly. We have no shortage of things that we should do, going back to the 10 Commandments or the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Where we have a short of is when people disagree about how to go about this, how to discuss and debate and try to reach a common understanding, including that I might lose this battle, but I have a belief that the next battle I might win, and not that I'm always going to lose, which is a problem for minorities in my country and has been for a long time. But just to repeat what I said earlier, a lot of what we should do is with the role models that we have. I've been asked many times who I thought what the most important person of the last 1,000 years was, and I think it was Gandhi. And I'm not saying that because I'm talking to India, it's because his autobiography, Experiments with Truth, was about how he debated with himself and with other people about what the right thing was to do, and how when he screwed up, as he often did, he tried to learn from it.
Yeah, thank you.
Maybe I will comment on it, and you could read my other future, because I have things to say about what you just said. But if you have a blog, I will then go there and I'll comment on it. Thank you, though, for your answer.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bhavani. I would like to invite Rondine to just shortly share her comments. And if time allows, then our colleague, Chris, as the last speaker from the plenum.
Yes, thank you very much, Dr. Melton and Dr. Howard. Thank you very much for this talk, and Dr. Sid and Dr. Bhavani for the general conversation. So when Dr. Howard mentioned about how many times I appeared in the interviews, I was recalling something that's been on my mind. It's also the way I is pronounced. It's not just I'm happier, it's I am happy. There's so much focus on I. And also with that, it's the my opinion that I associate with, and whoever speaks out against this position that I hold, they're wrong. And that's part of the authoritarian culture that was being discussed. So I was wondering, what do we do if the movement is going towards that, where no one can challenge that popular side, no one can speak out? How do we change that? How do we go back to allowing people to express their opinions without being the bad guys? Because they're different and they have different opinions, and they support a side that the popular side doesn't support. How do we change that is my question,
Well,
which I don't think
that's a very good question.
has an answer.
That's a very good question.
Sorry.
And many people are thinking a lot about that question. I think that the way I would think about it is to develop norms for conversation and for debate and ask people to honor those. And one of them would be to avoid prejudgment. Another would be to listen carefully. Another to ask questions for information, not for judgment. And even though I don't think people should have to swear that they're going to honor those conversational norms, in the absence of it, we have the problem where you describe, where people are just pointing fingers at one another. And we're just talking now about small groups, but of course the same thing happens in political entities, whether it's a city or a state or country or the United Nations. And unless we learn to listen and to respect and to take the other people's position as much as we can, we're going to absolutely just have a clash. And when you ask the question about I and we actually have the conversations all recorded. And there now exists technology where you could look at the emotional underpinnings of I versus we. It would take a doctoral student to do that, but we could actually see, because there are different ways of saying I and even of we. But thanks for that good question.
Thank you too, sir. Thank you for your.
Thank you, Rondine, also for the statement and the question. So we have 1 more minute. I don't know if time allows, but shall I invite Chris to raise his comment, or Dr. Howard? Is it time to say see you later? Is it time to say see you soon? Okay, wonderful. So then, Chris. Wonderful. Thank you very much. Chris, please, the mic is yours. Keep yourself short, kindly, and then we will close up after yours.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you to everybody. And thank you so much, Dr. Howard, for your time. I won't give too much background on my question because I'm sure you know it better than me. But I got the distinct feeling when I was a student in a small private college in Washington State that I was a commodity for my university, that they had allowed me to come there and graciously accepted all my money so that they could build their statistics. And then obviously, I just felt that there's a two-way street in terms of the commoditization of education. Definitely the growing ego of the students and the kind of entitlement culture. But also the sense that, at least in the US, education is not for the greater good, but it's a business. And the bigger the universities get, the more that this projectization that you mentioned becomes a kind of a culture of business where your product is, the education, and the people you get to, to trick to give you all their money are the students. I just wonder, is it possible to create an institution that goes against that culture and can survive in the current climate because of the business that universities have to run? And also, is that just too much of a cynical point of view? Is there another way that I can look at this issue?
Not from my research, but that of a research of a well known researcher. The single most important thing that determines whether an American college student has a good experience at college is whether he or she has a meaningful relationship to an instructor. And it doesn't matter whether it's a small school or whether it's a large school. And I forget the figure, but it's only like 3% of American college students report that they had a significant relationship with a teacher or mentor. And I think it's very complicated to unpack why that is. I mean, as a teacher myself, I've had office hours ever since I started teaching, but unless it's an exam complaint, those hours are often empty. And we probably need to do a better job of encouraging people to meet their teachers, have a drink with them, take a walk with them, things like that. I don't think that, because even though most of American higher education is nonprofit, you're right, the schools have to stay in business. And under COVID, dozens are closing every month. And of course, if they close, they can't give a higher education at all. But I fall back in what I said to the previous questioner. Students don't have to worry about what the trustees say at their meetings. They need to worry about their day-to-day experiences. And if they don't have meaningful contact with peers, and they don't have meaningful contacts with teachers or with people who are coaches, or with people who are in the dining room, or people who are keeping the campus clean and dry and so on, then they're going to have a bad experience. So I would tend to think about this at two levels. I mean, if you work for a giant corporation, whether it's Amazon or its equivalent in Tati in India, some very big organization, it is what it is, but your real experience is your day-to-day experience with other people on the job, the manager and the people who you manage. And I think that's where the engagement of the ethics comes into play. We're not going to change the macro economy of higher education, which is a $1 billion or pound enterprise all over the universe, but we can change the day-to-day experiences of people, and that's the grounds on which I work. So this discussion has been helpful for me. I'm sorry that we didn't have more time for it, but for a lot of reasons I do have to depart, but I guess I'll turn it back to Sid for any closing benediction.
Yeah, so first of all, obviously, thank you for a wide-ranging and deep conversation. And even though you weren't prepared, as you said on a couple of occasions, you were prepared. And your answers were very much on the mark. Two quick things. One is Darwin, when presenting his red tooth and claw understanding of relations between animals, felt that the place where he had the biggest problem and what could possibly overthrow his theory is people who work together for common purpose, for altruism. There are ant colonies, and there's some ants are there not to reproduce. They sacrifice their lives for the good of the hive. And there are a number of examples like that. And he saw that as a problem, and he anticipated what it turns out many years afterwards that people came up with as a solution to the problem. So there are altruistic acts that people do, mostly for biological reasons, mostly with kin. The closer you are to other people in terms of genetics, the more likely you are to sacrifice things for them. The trick is, how do you go beyond your immediate genes and to behave that way with people who do not share your genes? And to give a promotion for something which Howard knows I've been working on probably much too long. When we teach others, we have responsibility towards others. We have responsibility for their well-being and for their progress. And they join us in that. And there are moments when teaching and learning join, and create this spark of what Howard is talking about. Teaching is good work in a way. The intention behind it is. And when students feel disengaged, whatever, but when it comes time, and with this I end, when it comes time for examinations, they sit together, they cram, they ask each other hard questions, they debate them among themselves for the purpose of being able to pass the exam well, but it has that quality to it. So perhaps one way of fostering harmony among people is having people teach each other about what they know, also understanding that there are things that they don't know about what they're teaching. So Howard, I want to thank you again, really. I know, as I said, you're very busy, and I know that this is not the easiest time for you. And for both of those reasons, and also just out of the friendship that we have, which is the reason why you agreed to this, I know. I appreciate that deeply. And I am sure that the people who listened in on the conversation and what you have to say have walked away enlarged in their minds and in their hearts. Thank you very much, really.
Thanks, everybody. Peace.
Thank you so much, Dr. Holmes.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.